Happy Monday, my American Studies AMST 340 students. This is Professor Donald Earl Collins. It is now week 4. We are literally almost halfway, not halfway, quarter of the way through the course. It might not seem like we're a quarter of the way through because of the different things that have been happening over the last few weeks. We started a week earlier than normal, the earliest possible time you could start a semester at AU. We had Labor Day not happen until week 3. That sort of thing. Some of you, this is really only your second week in class. There's a lot of things going on. And I must admit that trying to teach this course online is actually harder than trying to do it in person. We're only meeting once a week for about an hour and 10 minutes or so. That's the longest we've probably met so far over the last 3 weeks, and it's really not enough time to fully dig into the complexities of all the material we have, which is why I'm really depending on you to pick up a lot of the slack in terms of being able to do this stuff on your own, being self-motivated, self-disciplined, keeping up with the readings, keeping up with the materials I'm sending you, that sort of thing. But what complicates this course really are two things, and some of this, it's not necessarily my fault, but it's part of what was the way the course is planned. And one of those is the fact that it's a seminar. A seminar course requires people to ask questions, make comments, get into conversations with each other. And while I can provide guiding questions, if you haven't done the readings or haven't understood the readings well enough to be involved in discussion, it's really hard to kind of jump in. So I'm going to continue to try small group discussions. I'm going to continue to try to do different things to help folks really get into that part. I've already posted your grades for weeks 1 through 3 for discussion. They're prorated based on the fact that some of you didn't join the course till week 2 or even week 3. They're also prorated based on the fact that, quite frankly, the first week there wasn't a whole lot of discussion the first week, and you had small discussion the third one. So there's that. So I'm probably going to grade you a little bit more harder in terms of your discussion grades as we move forward, but remember, it's the only part of the course I'm actually giving any grades really till the end of the semester. So it's really about you trying to learn and trying to learn the material. And that's the other thing I want to get to. And I'm going to spend more time on this in another video later this week. But I want to help you guys do everything I can to make sure that you guys figure out whether you want to do a group project, where you want to work with another student, or an individual one, where you want to do a group research project, or you want to do an individual research project. And figure out what it is that you want to do so you can figure out the corresponding entity or organization or school district or school that you want to work with. Right? And I'm going to send you some materials about how to figure out the nuts and bolts of how to communicate with folks to let them know that you're interested in doing something. If you're not already volunteering at a school or with an education-related organization, if you're already working for one, here's what you would do in terms of bringing up the researching. And I know some of you already are doing that work. So just let me know as soon as you can what it is that you plan on doing, because we need to have this together by week 6 so that you have enough time to do your work, do it properly, to be helpful to the folks that you're doing the work on behalf of, for, with, etc., etc. And also so that you can do presentations on it, video presentations on it as towards the end of the semester. So there's all of that. And to that end, I'm proposing, and I will post this later on in the week, that we have sessions the next 2 or 3 weeks that are not our standard 1-hour sessions, meaning that we have a separate date, either on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, where a bunch of you get together with me, ask me your questions, talk about how do we go about finding organizations, talk to me about your research projects, or what research interest you have, all of that. And so I want to set aside extra time for that. We could do it before class at 5:30 on Thursdays. We can do it after class at 6:30, 7 o'clock on Thursdays. We can pick a time on Friday afternoons, which I assume most people probably aren't either working and or in class, but I could be completely wrong. Or we can try sometime Saturday morning, say between 10 o'clock and 2 p.m. in the afternoon, for family in my household are awake and moving around and making all kinds of noises. So there's that. Okay. Again, I'm going to lay all that out later on in the week. This week, couple of things. This week is the second half of a 2-week period in which we're talking specifically about desegregation and the process of desegregation and other things in order to make K-12 education, in particular in the United States, more inclusive in terms of race, and to a lesser extent, race and gender. The intersection of race and gender comes into the fore here as well. And so you have readings from me, you have a reading from San Miguel, Guadalupe San Miguel, and I believe Richard Valencia on basically bringing bilingual education and inclusion back to schools, particularly for Mexican Americans in the Southwest, most notably Texas, but also, of course, Arizona, California, New Mexico, the whole Southwest. And then you've got Julian Velasquez Hillig and the Browns. Neither Brown. I don't think the Browns are related to each other around the illusion of inclusion. And so it's really about desegregation, and then what? What are we going to do besides put bodies together in classrooms that aren't just white bodies, right? That's essentially what inclusion, diversity, and all this multiculturalism, multicultural education, bilingual education is all about. Basically, creating a system where you go from social control and exclusion and segregation of different populations in favor of white Americans, but you also go through that process where African Americans, where Latinx folks, where Native Americans, as we talked a little bit about last week, feel more included. They're getting the education that they want. It's not just resistance to assimilation, but an actual education that in fact benefits them, gives them some sense of social equity, social justice, enables them to go out in the world, to further their education, to have careers, to have lives as equals within American society. And so that's what all of these pieces are really about. Fundamentally, is about that question. And the question is, do any of these reforms actually work? Do they reinforce social control in some cases? Or is there so much opposition to multicultural education in terms of curricula? In Chapter 5 of my book, Fear of a Black America, from ages and ages ago, deals with that very issue. Is there so much resistance to multicultural education, to Afrocentric education, to other forms of education that would broaden the curriculum and be more inclusive in terms of having a broader curriculum? Was this effective? Did it even have a chance to really flourish in a system that's built on Americanization and assimilation into Western and very Eurocentric, really white notions of how the world works, and who are leaders in the world, typically white and male and rich and so on and so forth, right? Bilingual education, same thing. Did Hopwood work really in favor of Latinx folks, particularly Mexican Americans, between folks living in the American Southwest? Did this actually work? Or did these sorts of decisions really reinforce the divide between Anglos and between Mexican Americans in school districts across the American Southwest? And then, same thing that Vasquez, Hellig, and the Browns are working on. Does inclusion really work? There's a policy that says, that goes as simple as the Barney song of "I love you, you love me, we're all one big happy family," to as complex as what I talk about in terms of what multiculturalism, multicultural education is, via theorists, educational theorists like James Banks and Cherry McGee Banks and so on and so forth. Is that really an illusion? Because we have these bodies here, but beyond just the bodies, the curriculum's basically still the same. The attitudes towards students who are not white are still the same. The school to prison pipeline's still the same. All the other aspects to this still represent this form of social control, even as people are talking and speaking about let's be more inclusive. Let's be more welcoming. Let's create a welcoming campus environment. Let's do something for Black History Month and Hispanic Heritage Month and Indigenous Peoples Day and so on and so forth. But yet we're not really doing anything other than massaging the edges of a system that's built on social control, injustice, and exclusion. So That's really what this week's all about. And so the questions from week 3 apply to this week too. I gave you a couple of additional questions and announcements to think about, specifically regarding to the 3 readings for this week. But really the main questions about, does resistance work? Is education itself, using this educational system to become educated in the ways of the world so that you are able to code switch between being black and being in a white world or Western dominated world? Is that really all that we can really expect out of this system in 2020, or obviously from a historical standpoint in the 1990s or 1980s or 1970s, right? Back when, yours truly had nothing but dark brown hair. That kind of question. So those are the questions that you really need to think about for this week. But beyond this, as we get past this week, we're going to this is the first week of pretty much the rest of the semester in terms of what we're going to be talking about. There will be some historical components to what we're dealing with in terms of the weeks coming up, but there will be much more tied to contemporary issues. Desegregation and inclusion and diversity and multicultural education and all the things that fall under that category are still very much with us in 2020. My book might seem old. In some respects, I can't stand this book anymore because there are a lot of conclusions I reached in this book that I don't believe in anymore. I don't believe ultimately that American education is a meritocracy, so I'm showing you my bias there. We'll talk more about that in coming weeks. With week 5, for instance, you have the story of standardized testing, ability grouping, and any racist, any xenophobic efforts. In other words, efforts to basically create the meritocracy that Americans purport American education to be when it's not. It's not a meritocracy, and more testing doesn't mean it's more meritocratic. It's actually less meritocratic because the people who do best on the test have the highest in terms of socioeconomic income in terms of their families, typically speaking. Research has shown that for nearly 50 years, since Christopher Jinks's book Inequality from 1972, which is also on your syllabus in the supplemental section of readings, just so you know. We're going to be talking about teaching as reform in week 6, and this is critical if you really want to look at schools, especially for those of you who want to do research projects that look at how schools operate and how the relationship between students and teachers themselves as being the bulwark of reform, transformative teachers. And so I'm not going to be able to give you the entire Melinda Anderson book, Becoming a Teacher, which is part of a series of things that Simon Susher is doing about masters at work in different professions. Melinda Anderson's this freelance writer who's written tons of articles for The Atlantic and other pubs around teacher education, teacher effectiveness, what the limitations of being a transformative teacher, and the promises thereof. And she looks at this one teacher who won Teacher of the Year award in Baltimore City in 2018, and her practices and her praxis and her approach to teaching students of color, particularly black students, in Baltimore City's public schools. And how even, as a veteran, she was able to do these different things. And so I will provide a few chapters from that for you to read. It's an easy read. Don't think that even if I give you like half the book, it's in 12 point, it's double spaced. It's not trade size. In other words, you'd finish the reading in less than an hour. So it's not that hard. And you'll also have the Atlantic piece to read for week 6. And then we'll start talking about more of the class-based stuff in American higher education in the coming weeks as well. So I'm telling you all of this because you've got to really figure out what it is that you want to do in terms of a research project in order to figure out the organization you want to contact, work with, or if you're volunteering already for an organization working with them, so you can let them know, hey, I'm doing this project. Is there anything that I could do that would be helpful to the work that we're doing as a volunteer here, as a part of this organization, part of this entity, part of this school district, etc., or as someone who actually works for you a number of hours. So you want to have that all lined up. You need to figure out the questions you want to ask, the project you want to do first, in order to figure out the entity, not the other way around. And so that's why I'm proposing all the things I propose in this video today, and also trying to go over what we're going to do in coming weeks.